All right, everybody, this is Deborah Owen, and I am really excited to be able to introduce you today to Chris Brogan. He is going to be speaking with us about social media. He is the publisher of the online magazine Owner Magazine. It's a business magazine for helping people develop connections and grow their capabilities. How about that? That sounds great. I've actually been reading it. It's a great magazine. He's also CEO and president of Human Business Works, a publishing and media company. And he does a lot of keynote speaking, and he's also been on the Dr. Phil show and even once presented to a princess, which I think is very cool. He's also consulted with Disney, Microsoft, Coke, Titleist, PepsiCo, and a whole bunch of other companies that you've heard of. His most recent book is The Impact Equation, which I've been reading and just loving. And he's also got the Trust Agents, with both of these with Julian Smith. So, Chris, welcome. We're really glad to have you here today.
Thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me.
This is terrific. Why don't you start by giving us a short history of how you got to where you are right now and how you ended up doing all this stuff online?
Well, maybe just a hair before all this, I should tell you that I grew up in libraries, both school and public. Back in the way old days, you were not allowed to have an adult library card till a certain age, right. And I used to hound the librarians, just try it out. Maybe you could just let me into the adult library section. They were very diligent in not letting me have what I wanted. When I moved from Augusta, Maine to Pittsfield, Maine, it was a very small town, and I stayed at the library so often that when kids would call to see if I could come out and play, they would call the library, and they'd have to send a circulation librarian to find me, and I'd take the call. This continued into high school. It also was in college. The first university I attended, Salem State, I used to hide in their library. I never went to class because I thought I had this figured out. I was like, no one even's looking for me. This is the best. Yeah. I can hide. Which wasn't the real way that should have gone, but I had fun. So, part of what got me there, though, is that because what libraries allow for, I swear this is not an ad for you, but what they allow for is they allow me to pick what I want to learn, and they allow me to sort of figure out more about what I'm interested in, which it took me not too long to figure out, well, the teachers have this curriculum, and you have to sort of do what they tell you. But you don't really. You could go to the library and learn all kinds of extra stuff or, work on topics that you care about. So That's how I got into social media, because way back in the days, back when there were bulletin board services and then America Online and all that, it was partly because everybody in my community just wanted to talk about a couple things. They wanted to talk about Red Sox, and they wanted to talk about Mustang versus Camaro. Okay. And, this is before the Red Sox ever won a World Series. I could have cared less about the team. And I said Camaro, and I couldn't figure out what else we were supposed to say in that conversation. And so I went online to talk to people about superheroes and Star Wars and whatever else I was into, and martial arts and stuff. And that's how I got into it. It has nothing to do with I saw some clever business value and needed that. That didn't come until like 2005 or so, when I was thinking, just wait a second, companies could do so much with this stuff. And that's when kind of better magic started to happen. So that was a good thing.
That's great. That's great. I love the connection to libraries. That's perfect. And it plays right into a lot of the stuff that I've been writing about on my blog, too, about giving kids the opportunity to choose what they study, and they'll be so much more engaged and interested in it. So thank you. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Yeah, so that's how you got into getting onto the Internet. And then kind of what you were in really early on. Can you tell us a little bit about how that started?
Oh, sure. So I was a budding fiction writer back in the way old days. I mean, since 5, I thought I'd be a writer of some kind. And I was writing a lot of fiction and sending it out to magazines and doing exactly the opposite of what one should do. I was just sending my story to everybody saying, this is great, and I don't care what you publish, you should publish this, which, of course, the work has to match the community, et cetera, et cetera. I did it all wrong. And so in my arrogance, because, as we all know, we know so much, I decided, well, maybe these guys are all just crazy, and I'll just publish it myself. And I started a blog in 1998, back when we were all calling it journaling, and using a fairly arcane piece of software that was, long lost to time. But interestingly, the guy who created the first ever commercial spreadsheet software, Dan Bricklin, is the same guy who created this software. He's a Massachusetts native as well.
Okay.
And when I met him once, what endeared him to me was I jumped up and down and said, "You made Trellix." And he had been the guy who had created Lotus 123, which is what Excel, came from and all that. He was so pleased because no one ever called him that we had a really good relationship. But using those tools, what I was doing was just expressing myself because I learned that I didn't need to get it in some magazine. I could publish it myself. And that's another building block of how I became who I was that I didn't have to wait for anybody.
Yeah.
In some ways, saying this to high school kids nowadays they're like, well, duh, because they have, Tumblr and they have Instagram and whatever and Twitter, and they know all about self-expressing. They've been expressed to heck, they're drowning in self-expression. Now it's a question of what can we do with it all?
Right. That's fascinating. That's a great point of view. What do we do with it all? And that's kind of a little bit of what we're talking about today. So if you could tell us a little bit about your recent book, The Impact Equation. You talk about leaving your mark on the world in order to have this impact. Kind of when we think about the internet in general and social media more specifically, how do you envision this happening?
So with any new technology, we get a lot more enamored with the tools for a while, and then we realize that we have to make some kind of meaning from them. Right. So when we all get our smartphone, we add 3,000 apps to it, and then it stops working, and we're like, we have to unload some apps. And then we realize we hardly use any of them anyway. With social media and all that, and with other platforms, because Impact Equation would work perfectly on pen and paper, right. The question is this: if it's all noisy out there and everything's busy and there's 500 channels and nothing on, how do you break through all that noise, and how do you really get the attention of people? And so Julian Smith and I came up with an equation that we thought would sort of explain this. And it was, you just take the word create, and we decided that the way to get this is that you take, to get impact, you take contrast, which means, how do you separate yourself from others, multiply that by reach, which is, how far does your message travel, plus exposure, how many times does somebody see your message, plus articulation, can you say it simply? Plus trust, do people trust or believe in what you have to say to them? And then echo, do people see themselves in what you have to say? And that word, create, just gives you, like, if you imagine it looking like equalizer buttons on a stereo, so that there's a 1 to 10 kind of a graph above them, you could look at yourself and say, well, am I really saying anything different than anybody else around me? Does my message go very far? And you might say that, if you're trying to make a brand new sneaker, you're going to have a hard time beating Nike in reach. But maybe you can beat them in echo. Maybe you can say, we're the sneaker made here in this small town that, isn't made by a bunch of people in some factory somewhere. And then poof, you've got that kind of built in America feeling going. So that's how we made the tools. We made the idea of this book to say, how do you stand out from everything else that's going on, and how do you really communicate and convey a message that matters?
Yeah, I like that. I especially like the echo, because I think that's something that our young people would be able to understand. That it could be overwhelming to imagine going against somebody like Nike if you've got this great idea for a sneaker. But if you've got a message for a particular group of people, then that would be where the echo part of it would come in.
Sure. I mean, it's a really weird time, because high school is this time where everything that made you weird before is being sawed off of you. Like, everybody around you is making it hard for you to be a weirdo. And then in college, what's going to happen if you go is that they'll be telling you to be a weirdo, but only special kinds of weirdos. And if you accidentally be the wrong weirdo, you're in trouble again.
Interesting.
And then you go to business or whatever your pursuit is, and you're going to have to try to fit in over there. But all along the way, like, none of that had anything to do with who you really are. Mm-hmm. Echo is, how do you find the people who actually would probably praise who you really are? And it turns out that before all this internet stuff, before we could see what people were posting on Instagram and Tumblr and Snapchat and elsewhere, it was hard to know if you were, alone in the universe. And now we know, if you are into chocolate sculpting and you like to make sculptures of famous people in chocolate, I promise you, if you Google that, then there's going to be some other person who also does it. And then at least it could be the two of you. And then maybe you'll have fans or something. And that's so different than how it used to be. And that to me is the biggest, coolest part of this whole technology, is that you really don't have to cave in and be like everybody else if you don't want to. You can really start to own your choices.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. It's true. That's one of the definite benefits of being able to get online and find a community. Yeah. If you can't find it where you are, you go find it elsewhere, and you don't even have to leave your living room. Although face-to-face is a pretty good thing.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I always tell people that the internet's a lot like Hamburger Helper for your life. You can't just take a box of Hamburger Helper and eat it. You actually have to put some hamburger in it. And so life is the 70% that should be out there. This is just the 30% that makes it okay. And, but it's true. I mean, especially, I grew up in, Augusta, Maine was the capital of Maine. But if you call it a city, that's kind of a joke. And if you call it the country, it's kind of a joke. And so nobody around me kind of was into what I was into. And then I moved to a little tiny town called Pittsfield, Maine, where everybody was really interesting and vibrant, and I loved them. And then I moved away from that to a part of Massachusetts, northern area, North Andover, where I had to be like everybody else or they hated me. And so my sophomore, junior, and part of senior year of high school, I was spent just sort of feeling like, oh, well, I don't really want to be what all you want to be. So I'm in trouble. And then along came things like, the predecessor to the internet that made me realize I could be who I want. That's what I teach businesses now. So what I teach businesses are, you don't have to go after everybody. Just find the people who like what you like. McDonald's, for as many people as hate them, they make billions and billions and billions of sales a day. So somebody's going in.
Right.
And I love their iced coffee. And I will argue to anybody that I like it more than Starbucks. And so I have no problem walking into the store. I don't feel like I'm deforesting the planet. And so there are people who choose to like the restaurant. Fine, we'll get together. It'll be fine.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's great. That's great. Thank you. One of the terms you use in the book is platform democracy. Now, can you explain that for us a little bit? And what is platform? What kind of effect does it have on reach, which is an important thing that we were talking about? And what should be the primary considerations for someone who may be just starting out online, or a young person who has a message that they want to share, or maybe they're getting a business going or something like that? How does platform democracy and reach, how does that all play into that?
I was talking to a group of college kids yesterday, and one of them had this interesting sentence where it was like I paid him to say it. He said, I really want to do this thing, but when I told them, they said I really shouldn't do it. And I said, well, that was the mistake. You told them. Why does them get a vote? You make it, make whatever you want. And that's the biggest change in all of this. I mean, my friend Justine really liked making funny videos of herself, and that's her living now. And she has met Sir Richard Branson. She's been a model for Call of Duty or whatever. She's done all these crazy projects just because she's kind of funny and smart. And, it doesn't hurt that she's attractive, but she's a really good media maker. And so she chose to do that. Michelle Pham is this girl who decided that she liked putting on makeup, and she was the first person to do really good makeup tutorials on YouTube. And she ended up making all kinds of, she makes all kinds of money now just to basically sit in her room and put on makeup.
Yeah.
Now, you can't do that because she already beat you to it.
Right.
But that's the platform independence, is that she didn't need anybody's permission to do this. I mean, YouTube takes the phone you already own. And by the way, a quick side note, if you're one of 3 people in the entire community around you right now that doesn't have the awesome smartphone, you'll get one in a few months or something. It doesn't matter. It's not a big deal. Sometimes people have this huge embarrassment over their phone. At this point, I really like to go the opposite way and have a stupid phone.
It gets harder to get a hold of people if they do that.
Yeah, and battery life. I mean, people with stupid phones get it, 2 weeks on the same battery, and we all get it on one day and we lose it. So
that's right.
What's smart about that?
When we communicate ideas, and for the sake of discussion, we'll keep it focused mostly on the web, the internet. Talk to us a little bit about where emotion fits into this part of the equation, because you had some great ideas in the book, I thought, about how emotion's important.
Well, it's funny how in business we tend to say we shouldn't be emotional, or we tend to say that be really careful about using emotional language. There's a lot of times when we're told emotion isn't really a good thing, but humans don't work that way. It just doesn't exist. And there's gender studies that say men are more logical, and I say pshaw, because I say that there's you can hurt a guy's feelings easier than you can hurt a woman's feelings sometimes, and vice versa. There's different trigger points. So in doing business, we do have to consider emotion. We do have to consider emotional connection. What we never, ever should do is do emotional manipulation. We shouldn't be, sad child with tears in his eyes and a bug on his lip and, give that hungry kid some food. I think that's horrendous marketing and horrendous business making. But I think that, at the time you and I are recording it, it's about the anniversary of John F. Kennedy's assassination. And I was listening to a speech that he gave on the civil rights movement. And Martin Luther King Jr. just added one little bit. He said, you have to tell him it's a moral issue as well. And so Kennedy just said, and this is a moral issue, and it's not just, a vote in a book somewhere. Right. And that one choice is like this emotion thing, because he really said, are you a good or a bad person based on your stance on civil rights? Now, again, was that emotionally manipulative? Probably a little bit, but he really did turn it from being a law in a book to something really important to pay attention to.
Right, right. That's great. Yeah, and I think that emotion does play into that. And actually, I was talking with our students recently about the difference between manipulation and just sharing a message, and watching that fine line, because that's important. I got some of the ideas of that from Simon Sinek's book, Start With Why, which is great. So, yeah. And what about the human element of communication? What is the ideal intersection of communication, collaboration, and connection look like?
The interesting thing about communication is we always perceive it to mean the way we speak, but it's really mostly about the way we're received. It's the way that the information we say hits somebody and they can do something with it. So, for instance, I'm not a big fan of big words. I think that a lot of times when we use really big words, we're doing it because we're afraid we think someone else thinks we're stupid. And I also think that sometimes we use big words because sometimes the word's easier. If I say obfuscate, it takes away about 11 words that I'd have to say to make that point. And that's why words exist. And yet, if I lose a bunch of people, it's kind of humorous to use that exact word, but if I lose a lot of people because I've just obfuscated my experience, then that's what's going on. So I think where, connection matters too is that when we read stories, it's really funny. The difference between, no one reads a newspaper. I had this pretend image of us looking at a newspaper, but when we're online looking for news or information of something we care about, it's a lean back experience. We lean back. When we're reading a book, like say a fiction book, and we really are into it, it could be a biography or something. If we're really into it, we lean forward and we really feel something emotional. When we go to a great movie or we see a good sporting event or something, when Iron Man defeats the bad guy, you're like, yeah, and a bunch of chemicals release inside you that make it feel like you were the hero. Okay. And that's the way movies are built. And there's a lot of endorphins that exchange that you didn't really earn, that come from visual motor cueing. And so with communication, what I like the most is if the communication makes the buyer the hero, it makes the other person the hero, the person that has to consume it realize, oh, that's what's in this for me. I will take this and make it a tool and whatever. That's the best. We learn this when we're 4. If one kid's talking about how great he is all day, you can about stomach that for about 4 minutes, and then you want to punch the kid or run away. And so, in this non-violent age, we just want to run away. But it's true. You have friends who brag, and friends who brag get boring pretty fast. Right. What we like is somebody who lifts us up or who empowers us or who gives us tools to, complete our mission. So to me, the best communication in the world makes the consumer of it the hero.
No, that's great. Thank you. Thank you. And then kind of the last thing from the book that I would like to ask you about is what does trust have to do with community. I like how those kind of intersect a little bit. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that.
So we stole whole hog the trust equation out of a really great book by these guys, David Maister and Charlie Green, who are friends of ours. And the book is called The Trusted Advisor, and it was written in the 90s, and it's sort of about consulting and whatnot. It goes so much further than that, but that's who buys the book. Okay. The trust equation is credibility plus reliability plus intimacy divided by self-interest, meaning that, like I was saying about people who brag or somebody who makes it all about themselves, that causes a problem. But if you have high credibility and high reliability and high intimacy, then you're likely to be trusted if you have a low enough self-involvement. So it's an actual easy equation to understand and follow, and you can really think about it with regards to the people you connect with. So how that reacts to community, though, is if you're not credible, no one's going to come and consume your content. If you're not reliable and you're not there enough for people, then they have no interest in being part of your community because there's no reason for them to be there. If you stand above them and you call them my fans or hello Cleveland, you have that problem. So that when we wrote about Echo, we talked about the difference between rock bands who shout out city names and Adele, who talks to every single person in the audience as if they're her best friend.
Right.
That's intimacy. And so that's how communities get built. I mean, content is the campfire around which communities gather, and then that community gets the opportunity to build some sort of marketplace or the like.
Oh, I like that. I'm going to put a picture of a campfire in this. That's great.
You go.
All right, so the last thing I want to ask you about is I did hear your interview with Jeff Brown on the Read to Lead podcast, which is one of my favorites.
Oh, cool.
And you ended that podcast with talking about being helpful. So if you were going to share that message with our students, and we educators certainly would like to be able to share that message, is there any way that you would expand that, or how would you share that with our students right now?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things in life that are simple but not easy. And, 2 words, be helpful. But, you then have to answer, how do you be helpful? You have to answer, what do I even mean by that? Am I being helpful because I'm going to expect something? Is it quid pro quo, as they say? What I mean by be helpful, all the money I've ever made comes from this. All money that I've ever earned in my life comes from being helpful. If I do something that's helpful to somebody else, there's a value exchange, and sometimes that's money. When most businesses fail is when they spend most of their time hitting their own chest and saying, we're amazing. And when they succeed the most is when they say, how can I make this even better? How can I really make it so that your life gets better and better? And, there's so many interesting ways to think about how helpful really starts. But, for instance, working on things like cause marketing and philanthropy and all that, trying to help other people. Tom's Shoes is a very successful, very wealthy business now, built on the concept that if you buy a pair of shoes, we'll give a pair to somebody else as well.
Right.
And that's a vital thing. I wanted to show you something. Oh, sure. I actually just found a book that I thought I didn't have, so I'm really happy. The other company like this is the people from Honest Tea.
Yes, I've heard of them also.
Seth Goldman and Barry Nailbuff. They wrote this really awesome book. It is so worth getting. It's called Mission in a Bottle.
Great.
And their version of helpful was they wanted to make really good, clean, organic, what do they call it? Fair trade tea. And so they were selling it. Well, then Coke comes along and says, we want to buy you. And so they think, oh no, the evil empire has come. But Coke said, we love your mission. We would like to help you expand your mission. Yeah. And at the point when they bought them, it was something like, I don't know, they only had 60% or so fair trade certified crops. So they couldn't really put on their bottle fair trade. They say, we try to buy it when we can. And Coke said, well, that's horrible. How do we expand this? So they took organic farming to a vast new level, because all the tea farmers had to choose to be organic farmers, which is of course better for the whole planet.
Right.
But Coke did this. Coke chose this. They said, we need to make it 100% fair trade so that we can talk that story. So Coke changed what they paid all these farmers. It's this vast transformational story that is the mission of this small company called Honest Tea that is powered by this massive company that we think of as sugar water evil vendors.
Right.
And they're not. They're just looking for ways to do what they're supposed to do, which is make a profit while helping. And that's really the goal. And so I think that's the mission. So everybody, students and educators alike, educators, that's why you're there. That's right. You exist to be helpful there. I don't have to teach you that. But with students even, That's how you get ahead. You don't get ahead by trying to protect all your eggs. You don't get ahead by trying to hoard the things that you have. You get ahead by going way past your own boundaries and figuring out what you can do to help somebody else. And that's every success I've had ever in my life, every chance I've had to meet anyone famous, all came from something where I was helpful.
Yeah. And that actually goes back to what we were talking about earlier about not being manipulative, too. I mean, the whole idea behind marketing and really even having a business, as you say, is, yeah, you need to make a profit, but along the way, you want to help the people who will be helped by your product, and not try to sneak it past them, because then they'll be resentful and they'll fall out of your community. I see all of this kind of wraps up in itself. It's just the spiral where it's all dependent on everything else.
Well, a really interesting example of that to me is MySpace, which had its heyday. Facebook comes along and knocks it off its pegs.
Right.
Justin Timberlake comes along and says, "Oh, I'll make it better." And they turned it into this platform where musicians and artists could sort of pontificate down to their masses and say, "Hello, fans." And it turns out the fans could have cared less and had no interest in being part of that equation, because they were so used to being part of, peer level networking on Twitter and Facebook and elsewhere, that it was not interesting for them to be in the audience anymore. There's been a phrase bouncing around since probably the 90s when or the early 2000s when I'm blanking on the name of it, one of the most important books. The Clue Train Manifesto came out,
okay,
and said, the people formerly known as the audience. There's nothing more true. I mean, it's astounding to me. This is just this. I'm on a little tangent, Deborah, but
that's fine.
Bear with me.
No problem.
I was thinking about this the other day. The top 10 people that we read and follow on YouTube, 4 of the 10 of them are video game related channels. Call of Duty Ghosts came out very recently, made over $1 billion in its first weekend of sales. No movie ever has made over $1 billion in a weekend of sales.
Wow.
And yet, who gets the coverage every single week in the mainstream? Movies.
Right.
No reason, just because games are frivolous, perhaps. $1 billion in a weekend, and the top 4 out of top 10 YouTube channels say gamers are really where it's at, and nothing in mainstream media shows that. You want to be helpful? Find the audience that loves what you do, and it's just sitting there waiting for you.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I will respect your time, but I really appreciate you sharing with us. There's tons of great information here, and I'm looking forward to kind of putting it together and distilling it into the blog post. So thank you so much for giving us your time today, and also for putting in a great plug for libraries. We appreciate that too.
I would not be who I was if I hadn't had the fun of being in love with libraries. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Chris. Okay.